Welcome to the Compact Disasters podcast from compactdisasters.com, formerly known as 5-Minute Disasters, the show where we explore natural and man-made disasters from around the world. This is episode 41, The Sinking of the Prestige. In November 2002, a Greek-owned oil tanker, the MV Prestige, found itself in serious trouble off the coast of Galicia in northwestern Spain. Battling a violent storm in the Atlantic, the ship suffered a structural failure, began leaking oil, and sparked a chain of events that would end in one of Europe's worst environmental disasters. But this wasn't just the story of a sinking ship. It was the story of political paralysis, bureaucratic buck-passing, and a disaster that grew worse with every decision not taken. The Prestige was not a young ship. It was 26 years old, with a single hulled design that was already considered outdated for transporting oil. Its ownership, registration, and management were a spider's web of international connections, registered in the Bahamas, operated by a Liberian company, owned by a Greek national, and carrying 77,000 tons of heavy fuel oil for a Russian client. It was a textbook example of a flag of convenience vessel, one that operated outside the reach of any single national authority. On the 13th of November 2002, while navigating treacherous seas about 250 kilometers off the Spanish coast, one of the Prestige's cargo tanks ruptured. The ship began to list. Thick, toxic oil poured into the ocean. Captain Apostolos Mangouras issued a distress call and requested to bring the ship into a nearby port for emergency assistance. He was refused. Instead of allowing the damaged tanker to dock and offload its cargo safely, Spanish authorities ordered it to be towed out to sea. Portugal and France quickly followed suit. No one wanted the ship in their waters. For 6 days, the Prestige drifted, leaking oil the entire time. With no safe haven and worsening conditions, the ship's condition deteriorated rapidly. On the 19th of November, the inevitable happened. The ship split in two and sank. One section went down bow first, the other followed soon after. The wreck came to rest over 3,000 meters below the surface. But the oil didn't stay there. It continued to leak from the wreck and float to the surface, forming an enormous black slick that began to move toward the shore. What followed was environmental devastation on a massive scale. Spain's iconic Costa da Morte, the coast of death, lived up to its grim nickname. Oil began washing ashore across Galicia, then further east toward Asturias, Cantabria, and even the Basque coastline. Birds, fish, shellfish, and marine mammals were smothered in sludge. Entire ecosystems were suffocated. The fishing industry, a lifeline for thousands of families in the region, was shut down. Thousands of volunteers poured in to lend a hand. Dressed in protective gear, they used buckets, spades, and even their bare hands to scrape black tar from rocks and beaches. Oil was recovered in enormous quantities, but far more remained, absorbed into the coastline or lost at sea. In total, more than 1,000 beaches were affected, and over 20,000 tons of oil were recovered from the water. The political fallout came almost as quickly as the oil. The Spanish government faced immediate criticism for refusing to let the Prestige dock. Environmental groups, scientists, and local communities argued that the decision to send the ship out to sea had allowed the spill to spread further, last longer, and cause more damage than if it had been contained near shore. But officials insisted their decision had prevented an even greater disaster. The captain, Mangouras, was arrested in the days following the disaster. He was charged with disobedience and environmental crimes. He claimed he had followed proper procedures and done everything he could to save the vessel and its crew. For years, legal proceedings dragged on. The ship's complex ownership and registry structure made it difficult to assign clear responsibility. The environmental and economic damage, however, was undeniable. Fishing bans remained in place for months. Clean-up efforts cost billions, and in some areas it took over a decade for local fisheries to fully recover. In 2013, after more than a decade of legal delays, a Spanish court issued its ruling in the case. Manguras was found guilty of gross negligence but was not sentenced to prison. The ship's owners and operators were acquitted. The verdict was widely criticized as too lenient. For many, it was a sign that those truly responsible, the ones who allowed such a vessel to operate in the first place, had escaped justice. But in 2016, Spain's Supreme Court overturned part of the original ruling. It sentenced Manguras to 2 years in prison for recklessly handling the tanker and causing environmental harm. The ruling also opened the door for the Spanish government to pursue financial compensation from the ship's insurers. It was a small step toward accountability, but for many, it still felt like too little, too late. Following the Prestige disaster, major reforms were implemented across Europe. The European Union banned single-hulled tankers from its waters earlier than planned. New laws were passed to enhance ship inspections, tighten regulations surrounding vessel registration, and establish more effective emergency response protocols. The concept of ports of refuge, safe harbours for damaged ships in crisis, gained widespread support, aiming to prevent a repeat of what had happened to the Prestige. Still, the disaster left a long shadow. It raised troubling questions about the shipping industry's lack of transparency and the difficulties of enforcing international standards. The fact that a poorly maintained vessel, operated under a flag of convenience, could legally carry tens of thousands of tons of toxic cargo through ecologically sensitive waters and then be abandoned in its moment of crisis, shocked many observers. It was a reminder of how environmental risk is often hidden in plain sight. The Prestige still lies on the ocean floor. Its broken hull, now sealed, contains some of the oil that never escaped. However, the greater damage had already been done. The spill blackened beaches, destroyed livelihoods, and exposed the vulnerability of governments when faced with an unfolding disaster that moves at the pace of politics rather than the speed of oil in water. For the people of Galicia, the scars remain, not just in the environment, but in the bitter memory of what happens when indecision, bureaucracy, and short-term thinking are allowed to drive the response to crisis. The Prestige didn't explode, and it didn't vanish. It fell apart, piece by piece, while the world watched, and no one stepped in to stop it. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Compact Disasters podcast from compactdisasters.com. If you did, why not leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts? And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you would like to support us more directly, please consider buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/disaster coffee to see how. Also, please check out our other Compact podcasts. You will find them all at compacthistories.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.